Hey everybody, it's Hawk here, and today we're talking about the actual dire flail, or what should be called the dire flail. Because the dire flail, as from Batwoman, the silly double-headed thing, should be called a double flail. Because dire, in the context of basically all of fiction, refers to things that are just bigger than their normal equivalents. Dire wolves are bigger wolves. Dire bears are bigger bears. Etc., etc. So a flail with two heads being called the dire flail doesn't make a lot of sense because it's not actually bigger, and in many respects it is actually significantly smaller. It will have much less reach, you have far less control, and you have far more predictable attack patterns, so it is very much lesser in all respects. Whereas this should be called the dire flail. This is a two-handed flail. This is not a pole flail, clearly, as you can see. It's not big enough. A pole flail would be as tall as I am and have a much shorter string. It's really just there to get around blocking things. Now, the reason I contend that this is the dire flail is because it's literally just a bigger flail. And if that's not exceedingly fantastical, I don't know what is. Now, as far as I'm aware, I don't know of any flails that are quite this big. I've seen several pictures of flails that are bigger, and you probably could have used in two hands. I've seen bits of the medieval art where it looks like a guy's wielding a flail in two hands, but I don't know if that's just artistic interpretation or an actual weapon. But I've never seen one that's quite this big. I don't know, I could be wrong on that. There's an awful lot of weapons in an awful lot of museums, but whatever. Point is this is my working copy. It's literally just some paracord and a tennis ball on a shovel handle stapled on the top. It's not very fancy. But the point is, it's just demonstrating why this is so much better than the other one, and probably should be called the dire flail. Now, as you can see here, I'm starting up. I'm going to back up a little more so you can actually see this. For very little motion, I can even do this one-handed, but that's partially because it's a tennis ball. For very little effort on my part, I can block a very large area off. Like, slow this down here. I am going from this point to this point. That's it. And I am blocking from all the way over here to all the way over here because of the length of the cord on this thing. Now, this is a very, very predictable attack pattern, and that's part of the downside here. It's just how predictable this is. This is the problem with flails in general. However, you can start doing some interesting things. Now, that may look a little sloppy to you, and it feels a little sloppy. But that's largely because I am not an experienced flailer, or whatever the term for a flailman would be. But, well, it feels a little awkward. I'm sure this is something that I would figure out the biomechanics of later. And as you can see, you can get some serious momentum going here. And part of the advantage here over the dire flail, which only had dire flail, is that it only had that much reach. I have almost triple that, possibly 4 times that. And if you take the full extension of this thing, it's the full length of a pole arm. A short pole arm, but a pole arm nonetheless. And the advantage there is, it's in a much smaller package. I mean, look at this. Instead of me having a pole this long, I have a flail this long. And I actually can operate in a smaller area by doing stuff like this. Or, probably more accurately, doing stuff like this. Now, if you're looking and going, that looks a little close to you, it is. There's a very specific sweet spot to hold this, and I just grazed myself there. It's very easy to cause that to happen, where it's just slinging in the wrong direction. But you can do, like, this is goofy. And it's like, why would you do this? Well, angle it up a little, and as you can see, I can keep that spinning. Now, obviously, this is not ideal because this is anchored with a staple on top instead of an arch, so it can actually fluctuate around a little bit. But I'm also using paracord, not a leather strap or chain, which would be far more traditional. But frankly, this isn't that bad of a weapon. I could totally see somebody actually designing something like this. Especially if you're like an adventurer and you want a beefier weapon to get some real oomph for your swings. Because you can, I mean, if you want to go a little crazy here, and I'm not recommending doing that, that's just all showy bullshit, but you can get a fair amount of momentum going on this thing. And like I said, just block off a fairly tremendous area here. Now, in a fantasy context, imagine we're going with the more traditional enchantments. Make this flaming or something else that casts light, and now you're just kind of slinging this ball of fire around you, or at least this menacingly glowing object. And you could just scare off animals with it by it just being this. And you can keep a fair amount of distance from them and do other neat stuff with this. You can do a lot of interesting things with flails. But this is a dire flail, okay? It's bigger, it's meaner, it's just a flail with everything added onto it. Now, of course, this means any of its flaws are exacerbated as well as all of its strengths. That's generally what happens when you make something bigger. Not always, but that's generally what happens. So in this thing's instance, if I was stronger, maybe a dwarf could. Dwarves are pretty stocky. They've probably got some fairly solid wrist strength with those massive forearms. They might be able to one-hand something like this and have a shield. Now, I can kind of do that, but it is very awkward. Now, of course, there's a way around this, would be to sort of to reverse it, and then have it taper off and end right here where it thins down. So most of the weight's on the back, or add a larger weight on the back here so I can kind of compensate. But this is not a one-handed weapon, which means you are using it with two hands, meaning blocking. And when I'm doing something like this, you can see that's still spinning around. Now, I can kind of deal with this by spinning it over here, and if I'm wearing armor, the head's not going to have a proper follow-through or proper force behind it. So if I do something like this, as you see it bop me, like alright, so it bopped me in the back. I barely felt it. Yes, it is a tennis ball and not a, 2-pound flail head. But if I'm wearing a breastplate or proper armor, it's just going to kind of bop me because it doesn't have proper force behind it anymore. Now, obviously, it's annoying, and it might be a problem depending on what you have on the weapon. You know, if it's just force discharged or something. This depends entirely on how your magic system works, but it just sort of softly bopping you isn't that big of a deal. Especially if you can take advantage of the spike you've got on the bottom of this. Because if you look at how I'm holding this, a small spike isn't exactly a big deal on this. I'm not holding it in such a way that, say, a 2-inch spike is really going to be an issue. Not going to be the biggest advantage, but it is a way to threaten people with the back end, or you could, of course, just club them with it, or choke up like this, and then just bash them with the metal reinforced end of this. Now, that's a little awkward on the handling part, because you can't quite get the nice baseball swing, but you can get some alright swings in here. So, in short, my very first impressions of the dire flail as I've made it and messed around with it, the training dummy version, I suppose, is I see potential in this thing. I see that this could be an actual valid weapon. Now, in a large military context, I don't think so. In a individualized adventuring context, maybe, because it can get you that extra reach you may want without you having to lug around a giant stick anymore, or something else large, obnoxious, and heavy. Also, if you wrap this around, just hold like that, you have a walking stick, which is kind of neat. Another reason to stick a little spike on the bottom of this. But anyway, tell me what you guys think. Do you agree with me that this should be the dire flail, the large two-handed flail, and not this stupid double flail? Or do both of them suck? Is there something I very much missed? Because it's entirely possible. I just kind of decided to play around with this for a little bit today and just see how well it works. So, remember to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment below, everybody. Peace out.